Hello and welcome to the Institute of Economic Affairs podcast. I'm Callum Price, Director of Communications here at the IEA. Today I'm joined by Martin Howe, who is co-authored a new report for the IEA and is also a leading intellectual property barrister. The report, Martin, is called Parallel Universe: How Ending Parallel Import Restrictions Benefits Consumers. Can you start by just explaining what in the world parallel imports are and what parallel import restrictions are?
Well, it's a highly technical phrase. But it's a sort of niche interest in many ways, but it's actually very important. What happens is, supposing you're a brand owner, you're a multinational company, you're a brand owner, and you own trademarks that protect your brand. And the purpose of those trademarks is to allow you to prevent people selling, counterfeit goods that aren't yours but are fakes and look like it, or selling goods that are have a confusingly similar trademark. But what's happened is, thanks to some quirks of EU law, which we've still inherited from our membership, these rights, trademark rights and also copyrights, can be used by the brand owner to prevent genuine goods from being imported. And the word parallel imports is a phrase that's used to describe when goods come into the country outside the sort of official brand owner's own distribution chain. They're sort of imported in parallel. That's why the word is used.
But it's legitimate goods, right? They're not counterfeit goods. They are legitimate.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. And it used to be the case, before we joined the EU and before we got too enmeshed in them harmonising our IP laws, that in this country, going right back to Victorian times, it was perfectly legal to import genuine goods. It goes right back to, in fact, to the 19th century, a case about a patent concerning special bottles that came from the patent owner's factory in France and were imported by a third party. Our law has said you can freely trade in those because they're genuine. And the reason that's changed is when we were in the EU imposed, or the EU court interpreted their laws to say that third parties are not allowed to import genuine goods from outside the EU without the brand owner consenting. Now, the EU, in fact, on the plus side, got rid of parallel import restrictions inside the EU single market. So you could freely pick up genuine goods in France and import them here, but you couldn't pick up genuine goods in, say, USA, an important place. There was the Levi jeans case at Levi and Tesco, where Tesco found that genuine Levi jeans were a lot cheaper on the market in North America, their country of origin, than they were on sale through the official Levi distributors in this country. So they bought up quantities of them and started selling them in Tesco stores, and they were stopped. So what's happened is these rights that are meant to be conferred to protect against fakes and counterfeits and confusingly similar, other people using confusingly similar marks, are actually being used by brand owners to segment different markets from each other.
So what then is, so we have these, so parallel imports is effectively a form of, it's free trade effectively, isn't it? As long as the products are genuine, you can buy and sell wherever you want on the free market between countries. And then the restrictions come in based on intellectual property rights. What is the steel man case for the restrictions? What would the sort of the hard advocates of these things, why would they say they are necessary and appropriate?
Well, the case against them, actually, there are quite a lot of different arguments that people raise of their varying persuasiveness. And it's argued, for example, that, the goods might be of different quality standards on different markets. Well, maybe, but then the brand owner can always either make their quality standards equivalent across markets, or maybe they can label them differently so people are aware it's a different quality of goods. One of the most, the point is there are a lot of vested interests.
Yeah.
You have a strong vested interest in this because bully for them. It means they can charge UK consumers more than they sell the same goods in foreign markets. So, everyone likes a monopoly. Why shouldn't they?
Yeah. Part of it's protectionism, isn't it? So we'll stop other people being able to undercut us by monopolising who can sell our product.
Yeah, well, protectionism, actually, in a way, it's worse than protectionism, because protectionism historically has been, let's protect our domestic manufacturers by keeping out foreign-made goods. Now, we all know, ever since Ricardo, the arguments against that, which, of course, the IEA has been in the forefront of the free market school of thought on why such protectionism is overall bad. But at least that has some sort of benefit for domestic industry. The problem with this restriction is that it doesn't benefit domestic industry. It benefits foreign owners of trademarks. And in fact, one could argue, it's difficult to do the statistics, but 100% of the extra cost caused by these restrictions, of course, falls on UK consumers. But only a small amount, I don't know, maybe 20-30% of the benefit would actually go to British domestic producers. The rest goes into the pockets of multinationals.
So if they're not working, then this is a slightly more political question. But why do we keep them when we left the EU? So at the moment, so we were part of the EU regime when we were in the EU, obviously, which was allowing parallel imports within the EU boundaries within the single market, but not from outside. And now we have a situation where we're not in the EU, but we still allow parallel imports from within the single market, but of which we are not a part, but not from places like America, Canada, Australia, India, wherever.
Well, I think it's sheer inertia of the government and political machine. Unfortunately, the last previous Conservative government came in saying they do all sorts of things with Brexit freedoms. The situation on parallel import restrictions is, as you pointed out, completely illogical. It made some sort of sense when we were a member of the EU to differentiate between imports from inside and outside the EU. But what we've done is we've simply carried forward that same pattern of allowing them in from EU countries, but not allowing them in from the rest of the world, with no conceivable rational justification for that. Indeed, it could get us into trouble under WTO rules for arbitrary discrimination against imports from one country, some countries compared with others.
And am I right in thinking there was a consultation at some point about it, that it's just sort of been long grasped in the classic way the government consultation?
Yes, they did a consultation. It looked as if they were minded to actually sweep away these parallel import restrictions altogether. And then, nothing happened for months. And then there was an announcement saying it was all terribly complicated and they were going to consider things further. Then nothing has happened. The trouble is the government machine, at least in this area, probably in others, is extremely prone to being affected by, loud, shouting special interest groups who have a particular perspective on this.
So what would be, talk to in clear, plain terms, the benefits of getting rid of them if the government were to reverse their inertia on this and to remove the parallel import restrictions from across the board? What would happen? What would we see?
Well, I think undoubtedly there'd be many ranges of goods where they would become cheaper for consumers, and that would be twofold effect. One is there would be parallel imports from, say, the USA or Singapore or whatever, particularly in say, the toiletries and perfumery sector, where you have identical goods sold all around the world, but they're just a lot cheaper in some markets than others. And the other, so parallel imports would come in, but the other effect of that is that the brand owners themselves would have to adjust their price levels to make them more equal compared with their prices in other markets. So you'd actually get a double beneficial effect, and without spending any public money, you would enhance the living standards of the British people.
So this is a free policy, right? We don't get any. There's no tax income that we get from it. There's no cost. It's just it's a rule that we've imported pardon the pun, from the EU and not do anything with.
Now, I'm a lawyer, not an economist, and my co-author Matthew has, of course, done a lot of work on the economic side, which appears in the paper. But from my perspective, I act for a lot of clients in this field, and I'm quite happy to act either for clients who want to bring in parallel imports or clients who, on the other side of the fence, want to stop them. My job at the bar is to, of course, just advance whatever side, not what my personal views don't come into it. But the fact is, people are willing to pay my very reasonable fees.
Anybody listening?
See, to the fact that people are willing to pay my very reasonable fees for advice or actually fighting cases on whether or not to allow parallel imports to come in demonstrates that there's a lot of money to be made on the arbitrage trade by third-party traders. The price differences are sufficient, or they're sufficient from the brand owner's point of view to make them want to fight very hard to prevent parallel imports coming in. So the answer is I'm convinced from my anecdotal point of view that it would have a substantial effect.
And it wouldn't just be, you point out in the report, it wouldn't just be on consumer prices, although that's a huge, and probably one of the main benefits, but it's also on the cost that public services pay for things. There's a great statistic in the report that you mentioned that from when we were in the EU, the use of free parallel imports in the single market saved, there's some study that has been done that shows that it saved the NHS over £800 million over the course of 5 years from the ability to through mainly pharmaceuticals, I think. So it's a public service benefit as well as a consumer benefit.
Indeed, it is. And I mean, pharmaceuticals are an important sector. In fact, post-Brexit, what happened when we were in the EU, our Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency had to follow very prescriptive EU rules before any new medicines could be licensed. As I said, parallel imports were allowed inside the EU. But what's happened since Brexit is that they've become more flexible in licensing products, say on the basis of the US Food and Drug Administration proves product there, in sort of looking across to non-EU data to prevent multiple duplication around the world of drug companies having to redo clinical trials, etc. So that's that's good, but the parallel import side has not been correspondingly liberated, and there is obviously potential there for savings to be made by public service as well. I'd say there's one particular qualification in the field of pharmaceuticals that we point out in the paper, where we might want to maintain parallel import restrictions. And that is, there are a number of drug companies who've taken a conscious decision to sell drugs, patented drugs, cheaply in less developed countries. And the point about many modern drugs is that actually the price you pay, most of it goes to the R&D, and the cost of manufacturing the next batch is actually quite a small percentage of the overall price. So by doing that, what they're doing is in effect collecting the bulk of the R&D cost from wealthier Western markets and allowing less developed countries to get the drugs just at cheaper, possibly break down at just the manufacturing cost or not much more. And the problem with that is if you had completely free parallel imports and abolished all restrictions, of course the drug companies would find that unsustainable because and also it would result in drugs being put cheaply on the market left as developed countries just being bought up by traders.
Because people would buy them in Africa, buy them and come sell them in
So it seems to me there you've got a sort of concrete justification for maintaining restrictions, and one would do that on a sort of conscious basis that, we are better off as a society, more wealthy than these countries, and we don't mind bearing, in the West, the lion's share of the drug development costs. We don't mind the fact But in effect, the effect of the restrictions is that less developed countries get a bit of a free ride on it because they can't afford to pay more.
But beyond those, so I mean that makes a lot of sense. But then beyond elements like that, then you would advocate for an almost entirely across the board abolition of these restrictions, would you? Other than in these maybe individual specific cases.
Yes, I think, but one can't rule out there might be other really compelling cases that might exist. But on the whole, many of the broader arguments I think are not valid or indeed are specious. I mean, the British book publishers get very exercised because many of their books are sort of licensed to US publishers, and US publishers manage to print them, put them on the market cheaper. So they're then concerned about genuine licensed books coming back into this country. But of course, the problem, if you restrict it, is 100% of the cost falls on British consumers, but only a percentage of the benefit goes to actual British publishers or authors. But the most ridiculous argument that they have advanced, I've come across, is to say this will result in a flood of cookery books coming in,
God forbid,
containing horrid imperial measures from the USA, and that this would cause consumers incredible hardship and confusion. Well, if you've ever looked up any recipe on the internet, you'll find that probably most of them are imperial or US type measures.
Yeah, the amount of times I've had to Google how much is in a cup of sugar.
How much is a cup or a teaspoon or whatever. So I think consumers are capable of.
Yes, well, I mean, I don't know where we'd be if it wasn't for the book publishers protecting us from evil imperial measures. I think that's all we've got time for, Martin, but thank you very much for joining us and for co-authoring the report, of course. If you would like to read the report, it's available on our website at iea.org.uk. We'll be back on the YouTube channel with more very shortly. Until then, thank you very much.